Today on Family Talk.
Welcome, everyone, to Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh, and thanks for listening to us on any of our radio partners across the country. Over the past 2 years, we have been working tirelessly to expand our broadcasting network. The Lord has blessed those efforts because we have added over 130 new affiliates. You can now hear Dr. Dobson and Family Talk in cities like New York, Houston, San Francisco, and Denver. You can see our full list of radio partners when you use our station finder feature at drjamesdobson.org. And of course, you can always listen online through our app or with your Amazon Alexa. Your support of this ministry has truly been the catalyst for our growth. And right now, any donation you make to Family Talk will be doubled thanks to a generous matching grant. So your $25 donation becomes $50. Your $50 donation becomes $100, and so on. Be a part of this match by going to drjamesdobson.org. That's drjamesdobson.org. Or call 877-732-6825. That's 877-732-6825. Okay, with all that done, now let's get to our program. And a question for you. Are you the parent of a child who is struggling in school? Has the one-size-fits-all approach to education left your son or daughter behind? Well, today, we will address this problem through Dr. Dobson's classic interview with author and speaker Cynthia Tobias. She is a well-respected name in educational philosophy, having written 13 best-selling books. Cynthia worked for 25 years in private practice and another 8 as a high school teacher. In just a moment, she and Dr. Dobson will discuss the importance of recognizing every child's different learning needs. Cynthia will also identify the right and wrong ways to motivate a child to succeed. This is a very practical broadcast for all teachers and parents listening, so let's jump right into this classic Family Talk broadcast. Here is our host, Dr. James Dobson.
Cynthia, what led you to this emphasis on individual differences between children?
I was a high school teacher, high school English teacher, and an enthusiastic one the first year, and a lot of the seasoned veterans and administrators told me from the very beginning, certain kids aren't school material, and you're going to waste your time if you spend all this extra effort and energy trying to get these kids to learn that don't want to, so just drop them through the cracks and teach the ones who'll get it. Well, what bothered me was that the kids we were dropping through the cracks were my favorite kids. They were bright and creative and intuitive and, a little obnoxious. But I kept thinking, we're letting a lot of bright, creative kids get by because we're not reaching how they learn. And then in 1980, I took my first learning styles class when I heard someone validate what I had believed and what I'm sure you believed as a teacher to say, the bottom line is the learning is very important and the goal is very important, but there are a lot of kids that have a lot of different ways to get to a very worthwhile goal. And it was like the curtain came open for me and God just placed his hand on my life and said, this is the message. This is where I want you to go. And I often kid about it. When I first started, I was a freshman at Northwest Nazarene College in Nampa, Idaho in 1971, told the Lord I wanted to be a writer. Didn't want to do anything else.
You told him.
I told him, that's right. I said, I don't want to be a teacher anymore. I want to be an editor of Good Housekeeping or something. And of course, before I even was through my first freshman year, I knew I was supposed to be a teacher. So 20 years later, almost to the day, is when The Way They Learn came out. And it's like God said, what would you have written about? He had a calling and a message and a ministry for me, but it took 20 years of teaching and discovery to find out what that was.
You spoke on that subject on the tape that I was talking about. You gave a presentation to an audience. It was very funny. I'm sure we'll air that again. But it resonated with people. We had 45,000 requests for that tape, and especially to teachers who have stood in front of 35 kids, as you and I have, and wondered how to reach each one of them because they are so different. You can't really generalize. I mean, there's some categories, but they're so unique, and you really have to study the individual child, don't you?
You do, and it's not as hard and as complicated as it sounds, but you do have to have an open heart and a willing mind to realize and honor the diversity that God built within us from the very beginning.
If I had to kind of summarize your theme, well, let me take a run at that and see if this is accurate. We have misunderstood in the past how complex human beings are, and therefore we've kind of grouped them in simplistic categories like lazy and temperamental and bratty and all the words that we use. The truth of the matter is they're much more complex than that.
Yes.
And that they are a combination of influences and forces, hormonal forces and urges and drives and inclinations and desires and inherited characteristics. I'm convinced of that. And all that and the biochemistry of the body is interplaying to craft that individual. And if you're really going to meet that child's needs, and you're really going to get the most out of him or her, you have got to understand who you're dealing with.
Exactly.
Does that kind of put it into words?
Absolutely. In fact, in the new book on page 24, we have a picture of a puzzle and a lot of different pieces saying that, we have a lot of pieces that aren't even labeled yet. We have some learning style pieces, which are kind of the fundamental framework. We have personality, which is different, and temperament, which is different, and gender and birth order. And then there are pieces that don't even have a name yet, because we know we can never take just one test or one way and figure out what a person is. There are too many complexities and shades.
Okay, bring that down now to the practical level with parents. How can they get to know those kids? They haven't studied what you've studied, and they haven't had the experience, many of them, that you've had. How can they know what that particular child, they know they're not reaching him or her. He's not studying, he won't work at home. He's hyperactive, whatever the characteristics are. How can they hone in on the individual?
Two things that are real simple and sound maybe almost too obvious. One of them is the chances are good that there's at least one child in your family that will be nothing like you. So if you have a child who won't go to their room, he won't go to his room and do his homework, he won't do it quietly, that's probably what you would do, but what he doesn't want to do. The second thing that's real simple is just start watching. You don't need a formal test or even to read a book to know when your child is happy and when they're content and when they're productive, not even with homework. How about when your child is playing happily, when they're most satisfied? Take notes, mental notes, or even jotting them down. Who's around? What's the environment like? Are they working with somebody? And keep track of that in almost a journal type entry. In a month or two, you're going to see, or maybe even a week or two, you're going to see some patterns emerge.
You begin to understand a little more about what I have observed, Cynthia, is that the parents who have the kids that are most different from them, especially the mother being most different from a child, usually a daughter, the friction occurs out of that gap. It's a blind date between mother and baby, because the mother would never have behaved that way, would never have responded. Well, the child's not doing what I would have done in that same situation.
Exactly.
And it's very difficult to understand. And sometimes there's a term that's used by child developmentalists, goodness of fit. Exactly. Sometimes those personalities don't mesh like they should because the kids are so different from the parents.
And then it's a wonderful thing that we have a God who has a lot of mercy and a lot of grace, because many parents wonder, they're very frustrated. How will I can never understand how this child thinks. Fortunately, you don't really have to. You need to accept it, and you need to trust God and His infinite wisdom to help you deal with it. But one of the things I remind people in the beginning of the new book is that the things that are most annoying about your child right now are most likely what will make them most successful later. I found in working in corporate America, that you get hired for most of the things you got in trouble for in school.
Aggressiveness, individuality,
talking
creativity.
Too much. Exactly. Tinkering with things. And an awful lot of very successful executives won't even talk to you about how they did in school.
Every child can succeed. Do you really mean what it says here? Making the most of your child's learning style. Every child can succeed?
Absolutely. Every single child.
What about the hardcore underachiever who just ain't gonna? You've met him or her, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
It's usually a boy.
We have to ask ourselves again, who's deciding what success looks like? What is the definition of success? And what's the point? And if you get a kid like me who's got a pretty strong will, and you've determined for me what I have to do in order to prove I'm successful, what if I just decide I'm not going to do it because you can't make me?
Cynthia, you have a strong will?
Yes,
You're tough,
that.
Cynthia? Is that right?
I was a nice, quiet kid. You couldn't have traced half the trouble back to me. But I know as a child, and I know as an adult, that I don't have to do anything except die, which I'm willing to do. Now, if as a kid I'm willing to die for it and you're not, I win. I'm dead. but I win. And this is very frustrating to parents who are saying, look at all this potential. Look at this kid who's getting D's and C's and could be getting A's and B's. You need to work harder. You need to try more. Don't you realize that you'll never make it to college? And these sorts of messages don't do anything to motivate a kid like me.
How do we get him or her working?
I have to be inspired. I have to be dedicated to the goal. I have to see a purpose, a compelling reason to do something. Now, my sister will do it because it's important to you, but I'll do it
because it's important to you.
Because it's important to me and something that I care about.
You believe in the use of rewards.
I do, but I believe that rewards purely for reward's sake, not necessarily, but rewards in the way of motivation. For example, I don't do much just for the intrinsic sense of just pure love of learning. I do it because there is a reward in it. I can help someone. I can make a difference. If you define reward that way, then I do believe that reward and motivation go right together, hand in hand.
You know, one of the simplistic things that was taught when I was in school is the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And the implication was there that only intrinsic motivation is really important. And the truth of the matter is a lot of kids don't have intrinsic motivation, that which comes within. They simply don't care. They're not driven by the same thing.
Right.
And you either provide an external source of motivation or you don't get into their motivational system at all.
But again, one of the things you can do is teach that child what it is they need to motivate themselves. You may have to start out with a reward or two. You may have to say to that kid who doesn't want to keep his room clean, well, what do you think it would take? And be prepared for him to say, well, nothing, I don't want to do it.
See, I think nearly all motivation is extrinsic.
Yes.
In other words, I study because that pleases you, and I like it when you're pleased with me.
Right.
Or I study because then I look smart to my my peers. Or I study in order to get in college. Or I study, it's nearly all extrinsic.
Exactly.
It's just a different source of motivation a little bit.
Right. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. Again, especially if I as a child can be taught what I need, now as an adult, I know what it will take to motivate me when I need to be motivated.
You mentioned being a strong-willed child. You're writing another book on that subject, aren't you?
I'd like to, the working title
See,
is...
I beat you by 19 years.
Well, you set the standard. And Dr. Dobson, I am who you talked about. I am that person. It takes one to know one. And when you run into a strong-willed child, you know better than most. You have a wonderful kid. I mean, we're talking strength of conviction.
That's right.
Determination. And if you can direct that into the paths of righteousness, you have a kid who's going to change the world. And what worries me is, I wonder how many teachers and Sunday school teachers, how many strong-willed kids are we driving away inadvertently because we don't understand how their mind works, because we don't understand that we can't approach them in exactly the same way as we can a more compliant child.
You talk a little bit here about attention deficit disorder. You've got some thoughts on that. There are an awful lot of parents out there that are struggling with a child with ADD, or at least they think they are. Comment on it.
It worries me. I've talked to several leading pediatricians even in the last several months who are not just concerned but alarmed. In fact, I had 2 different pediatricians say to me, I worry that with this much casual diagnosis and this much medication, I worry that we're trying to substitute medication for parenting. You and I both know there are kids who really truly have some problems that must have intervention. But what if for every kid who truly needs it, what if we're putting 9 or 10 on top that are just inconvenient or a behavior problem? I think we have to be careful. One of the stories I give in the book is, if I take my children to the shoe store and the shoes don't fit, I can't change the foot, but I can't let them go barefoot. They need to wear shoes. I need to change the style to fit the foot. What I'm worried about is that in education, traditionally, we offer very few styles. So we insist that your child choose one of these styles. Now, if none of these styles fit you or your child, well, then you're going to have to alter your child.
Well, let's run with that. I think we have time to do this. In your first book, you talked about 5 learning styles, I believe. Was it 4 or 5?
5 different models.
5. Why don't you run over those very quickly and see if parents maybe identify with one or the other?
Very quickly, we did the environmental preferences, that not everybody needs to study at a desk, and some people like brighter light, and some people need to eat or drink while they're working. That's why you can actually have a child who will do homework in front of the television with a can of diet soda and actually get the work done.
That's me, by the way. If I'm in my office all day I have C-SPAN or I have CNN or I have television going, and I write books with the television 7 feet away, and I do better with noise. Yeah, and it drives Shirley crazy because she's got to have it absolutely quiet if she's going to think.
Exactly. And the point is, you get done what you need to get done.
Yeah.
Does it matter if it's exactly the way everybody else wants it? We talk about modalities, and those are familiar to most listeners. The highly auditory child who actually doesn't need to hear as much as they need to hear themselves talk. This is the kid who's got that thinking noise going on all the time. He may not even talk. My auditory child doesn't talk that much. He just makes noise. There's something in the back seat all the time. The bop-bop-a-doop-bop, the highly visual kid who looks like a daydreamer in class, but I'm trying to get a mental image of what you're talking to me about, and you didn't show me anything. That highly active kinesthetic kid who needs to just move, whether it's just squirming or fidgeting or changing positions. We talk about the model of the more analytic versus the more global learner. Some people are highly analytic and remember exactly what was said. Others of us are what we call global, big picture, which means I remember the gist of it. I know what the concept was. I just didn't remember exactly what was said, which is why I can walk out of a sermon or a class and say, oh, it's just exactly what I needed to hear. And someone can say, really, what was it about? Well, I told you it was exactly what I needed to hear. You didn't tell me I was going to have to tell you what it was about. You need to warn me ahead of time what details to listen for. As a learner, you need to talk me through things instead of handing me a manual to read something, because I don't read directions much. I just look at them and go, so what did these say? Can't you just interpret for me? Again, in school, if you're highly analytic, you have a much better chance of looking a lot smarter than if you're highly global, because the teachers get frustrated with you. Why do you always ask for your own set of questions? Why can't you just sit down and read something, for heaven's sake, that I put together for you? And this can be frustrating. We talk about the Gregoric model, which is the concrete versus the abstract. The person who's more literal. Just say what you mean. I don't want to look between the lines and read in hidden agendas.
Those people hate poetry.
That's right.
They love prose.
That's right. And figuring out what it means. What do you mean? What does it mean? Just read the words. Versus the abstract, who's very good at picking up on hidden agendas and intuitive in between the lines. The sequential person, step by step, beginning, middle, end, versus the more random person. As long as you get it done, does it really matter? If you have to go every single step, do I have to balance my checkbook as long as I'm not overdrawn? I mean, does it really matter that every single month I have to write every single thing down? When you put those combinations together, we have 4 in the book. We talk about the highly concrete and sequential kid, the abstract and sequential kid, the abstract and random, and the concrete and random. And then, of course, we just barely touch on the multiple intelligences, which are the many different ways of being smart.
That's not only true of children, but it's true of adults as well. And
right.
It's like a basketball coach. If in the NBA, if Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the greatest center of all times, was asked to play guard out front, he wouldn't have made the NBA.
Exactly.
Because he wouldn't handle the ball that well.
But
you put him under the basket, and he's the best of all time. So you got to know how to fit people to the job.
And we're not trying to level the playing field. We're trying to choose the right positions. Just as you say, a quarterback is not going to do a kicker's job very well.
Okay, Cynthia, we're coming very near the end. Let's do a global look at your 3 books, The Way They Learn, The Way They Work, and Every Child Can Succeed. If we're talking to a parent right now who says, I don't know that child, I don't know how to reach him or her, something's not working. Which of those 3 books would be a place to start to understand that individual?
The Way They Learn would be the starting place as far as identifying, and then Every Child Can Succeed would give you the nitty-gritty, very detailed strategies on what to do with it. The advantage of buying both books would be at the end of this one, and there's an appendix, a profile, a copyright-free profile that helps parents fill it out with their child.
This book is very practical. It's filled with specific advice. It's not just a collection of stories, and it deals with what to do next.
Right. If this is it, this is probably why it happens, and here's what to do.
And you find tremendous resonance with parents on these subjects. Tell me what they say to you.
I've had some great letters. I had a letter from a lady just the other day who she heard the little sound bite that Briargate Media put out, little back-to-school specials. She wrote the letter. She says, I can't tell you how much I love Every Child Can Succeed. She said, I was in my car listening, and you came on talking about the book, and I turned the car around and drove to my Christian bookstore right then. And she said, in 24 hours, I had read the book. And she said, and she proceeded to tell me about the child that she was concerned about and how it had made a revolutionary difference. And of course, that's what we live for. That's what we're in this whole ministry for.
It sure is, and that must be very gratifying to you.
Yes, because again, it's not me. I mean, the thing I love is that I didn't make any of this up. I mean, it's all solid empirical research done by great scholars, but it's pretty boring for the average person to go to the intellectual cul-de-sac and read. I just brought it out to the street where everybody lives and translated it. And in much the same way as we lift up Christ so that people are drawn to him, that's what this is doing, lifting up these wonderful, liberating, practical things and telling people, you know what, you're okay, you've got a great kid, and your child is okay. But when you can identify your child's strengths, we can help you find ways to help them succeed for the rest of their life.
What a word of encouragement to end on. Your child's okay. You know, in this day and age, parents fear the child's not okay. Right. And that is an awesome thought, that this little person that I've come to love, that we brought into the world, that I'd give my life for, is not making it. It's not okay. But most of them are okay. And they'll be more okay if we'll understand them, right?
You've got a great kid. That's right.
Cynthia, thanks for being our guest today. This is very practical information that parents can use, and there's even more in the books. And there's a lot there that we didn't get around to talking about. Cynthia, I know you have to leave, and thanks for being our guest, and blessings to you.
You too. Thanks so much.
Well, you've been listening to Dr. Dobson's timeless interview with author and speaker Cynthia Tobias here on Family Talk. I'm Roger Marsh, and hope you learned something from today's classic broadcast. You can visit our broadcast page at drjamesdobson.org for more information about Cynthia Tobias and her helpful books and her organization as well. And while you're online, be sure you also check out the Dobson Digital Library at dobsonlibrary.com. This is our complete inventory of Dr. Dobson's work over the last 40 years, and we have cataloged all of his articles, blogs, newsletters, and past radio programs as resources just for you. You can also search under the Marriage tab. Also, we have tabs for faith, parenting, and culture to help you find what you need. So you don't have to look anywhere else for practical tools and insights to help your family. Take advantage of Dr. Dobson's years of knowledge when you go to dobsonlibrary.com. That's dobsonlibrary.com. Finally, did you know that you can stay up to date with Family Talk on your Amazon Alexa? This hands-free device allows you to listen to all of our broadcasts through a simple command. Once you enable the Family Talk skill, simply say, "Alexa, play today's broadcast of Family Talk." It's that easy. Don't miss any more of Dr. Dobson's new or classic programs. Stay connected to Family Talk by listening to your Amazon Alexa today. For more information, simply go to drjamesdobson.org/Alexa. Well, we've run out of time for today's broadcast, so be sure to join us again tomorrow for the conclusion as Dr. Dobson's conversation with Cynthia Tobias continues. Here's just a preview of what you're going to hear next time.
If you've done your homework and you've done the best you can in rearing your child in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, it is important to surround them with love and with Scripture and with prayer. For instance, as a strong-willed kid, I need to know that I may have a propensity to get in trouble if I use my strength of will in the wrong way. And it may be especially easy for me to do that depending on what crowd I fall into. But the time that you can spend really helping your child get to know who she is and what her strengths are will help her stay committed to the God who designed her in the first place.
That's coming up on the next edition of Dr. James Dobson's Family Talk.
This has been a presentation of the Dr. James Dobson Family Institute.
Is it possible to love a child too much? Probably not, but it is possible for a parent to be so emotionally entangled with a son or daughter that the child isn't granted the freedom necessary for healthy development. I've dealt with many overprotective parents through the years who created such a dependency relationship that their children were trapped at an immature stage. I remember one mother, for example, whose entire life revolved around her 3 kids, so much so that she spent most of her time sitting at a front room window watching them play. She feared that they might get hurt or need her assistance in some way. All of her other responsibilities and interests were ignored. Guard duty at the front window was her only function. Now, as you might expect, this woman suffered enormous anxiety over the known and unknown threats to her little girl's well-being. This kind of involvement might look like love, but it's done at the expense of children. Boys and girls do best when their parents love them immeasurably and they're there to care for them, but then are willing to let them take some reasonable risks necessary for independence and growth. That's what makes raising kids so difficult, trying to find a balance between the commitment the job requires in the early years, while also recognizing that we don't own them and they will soon stand on their own. The best guideline? Hold them close and let them go.
Hear more at drjamesdobson.org.